Begin.
What is up, everyone? Welcome to this, our sixth and final panel of the 2022 VR Winter Games put on by the Virtual Athletics League. I am Nate McCollum, or as I'm known around here, Vanlin, and I handle all the developer relations stuff. And joining me today to talk about one topic that I have been extremely excited to go over is Dave from White Noise Games, the developer behind Eternal Starlight, and Alexander from Starcade Arcade, the developers behind titles such as Space Slurpees and Star Blazer. So, guys, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So, just to real quick to acquaint the audience with your individual titles, can you just give a rundown of your specific ones related to the topic at hand?
Sure. You want me to go first?
Yeah, you spoke first. Go ahead. Go first.
Sure. So I'm the developer for Eternal Starlight. It's kind of a VR RTS game. It's out on Quest and in the Steam store.
All right. And then I'm Alexander Clark from Starcade Arcade. I left corporate America to make indie VR games, which includes a strategy game, Star Blazer, the arcade snake game, Space Slurpees, and then the pandemic-focused game, Virus Popper.
Yes, and I have played all of your games. Well, both of you. I played both of your games, but my wife and I particularly enjoy Space Slurpees, so it's it can get kind of competitive, and I may or may not have hit my head on a piece of furniture one or two
Definitely.
times. Real quick, before we get started, I did actually forget to mention here at Val, we actually have an exciting announcement that I do kind of want to push a little. We have just launched our Start Engine campaign for equity crowdfunding. And so if anyone watching wants to support the Virtual Athletics League, you can go to startengine.com/Val to check us out, be able to contribute if you'd like. We're basically offering stock. Think of it as a Kickstarter with like an equity amount to it rather than you're actually buying a product. Again, that's startengine.com/VAL. All right. So with that in mind, I've got a fair amount of questions for you guys. As you know, I showed you beforehand. But if anyone in chat wants to chime in, feel free. I'm always happy to field questions from you. But I guess first, I've got one big question for both of you here, and it's one that I asked my friends. I asked my friends and my family, like, what would you guys want to ask an RTS VR developer? And so, we don't see a whole lot of RTS games anymore. Because, I'm a kid from the 90s. I grew up in, like, the golden age of RTS. We had Warcraft, we had Starcraft, Age of Mythology, Age of Empires, Empire Earth, the Homeworld, Empire at War. And of course, Command and Conquer, which I personally will never forgive EA for the way that they have just butchered that franchise. I mean, just right here, right freaking here. So, but I mean, that's just my own opinion. Everyone's free to have their own. Do you guys think that, like, why do you think that is, though, that we've seen this slowdown in RTS titles? And do you think we're past like the prime days of real time strategy, or could there be another ascendancy of it?
Yeah.
Like to take it, Alex?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. It's something I've thought a lot about too. I think a big part of it comes from the fact that one of the biggest learnings I've had in making Star Blazer is I don't feel like there are any casual RTS fans, which means those that are fans of the genre, they usually have a very specific mindset of what an RTS game should be like because they've been playing it for so long and are so enmeshed in it. And so if you look at, let's say, the flat RTS space, I think it's hard for developers to get in unless they're a pre-existing franchise that people would already be familiar with, or if it's a brand moving into that genre. Let's just say like Halo into Halo Wars, right? I think they have a lot of clout just from the brand moving into RTS, which helps. I think for an indie dev, if you were to make a new RTS game, some of the feedback you'll hear is, why doesn't it have, and then list off everything that StarCraft has? That's what people are looking for. So you can't really differentiate. But then once you do that, then it's like, well, why wouldn't I just play StarCraft? And so it's a difficult genre to break into.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think RTS didn't like fully die. It just kind of evolved into a bunch of different other genres. So like, MOBAs kind of came from RTSs, tower defense games, like a lot of mobile games borrow stuff from RTSs. I agree that I think RTS games like kind of got more and more complicated as time goes on. They really kind of appeal to that like hardcore audience. And like a lot of the big publishers, there's like kind of this big move into like keep things mainstream, like simplify everything as much as it can be simplified. And like RTS kind of like goes against that in a lot of ways because it's like you're managing all this complexity of like all these little units and they all have different abilities and all this stuff. So I think it just kind of moved, like what was mainstream kind of changed over time and RTS kind of fell by the wayside. But I mean, I think it's definitely possible that somebody else could come along someday and come up with a really slick like reimagining of like the genre and it could be back. I mean, I think that happens all the time with genres.
Yeah, I mean, it could just be that we're in kind of a bit of a winter when it comes to RTS games. And part of me honestly thinks that was a lot of people jumping on the hype bandwagon because Command and Conquer and the Warcraft and Starcraft franchises just did so amazingly well in that late 90s, early aughts period.
Yeah.
But it kills me inside a little bit to just see the landscape be just so empty. Like the last good RTS I remember picking up was the last installment of StarCraft 2. Which I still play because it's Blizzard and they they do quality product most of the time anyway. We can debate the WoW expansions, but that's a whole different story. Right on. Well, the other big question that when I've asked some of our staff here and some of my friends and whatnot about VR RTS, that they wanted to ask is when a lot of people think about VR games, especially the ones that are like not initiated into VR, after they inevitably always mention Beat Saber because that's what everyone thinks these days. Which, to be fair, they've done a lot. But after they always inevitably mention that, the ones they always bring up are like first-person shooter or racing or some kind of sports game and whatnot. No one ever mentions real-time strategy. And admittedly, this is conjecture on my part, but I kind of think that that's not isolated. I really do think that that's something that a lot of people who, especially those who aren't initiated with VR, kind of think. So with that in mind, like you've both developed reasonably successful RTS games in VR. Why did you go against the grain and decide to do an RTS game as opposed to something a bit more mainstream that might have had wider appeal?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. About the audience being skewed towards like Beat Saber and shooters and all that stuff. I mean, I definitely like. My thing is, I always want to do something that's like kind of new and like hasn't been done before. And definitely, it seemed like things were getting really oversaturated with shooters when I first started development. Um, and I mean, like, there's so many other experiences that are possible, and like, there's this huge push towards everything being like an embodied experience, or like you are the character, and not a lot of experiences like RTSs where it's like you're kind of like a god type character, like controlling things. So it's kind of just like a new thing that hadn't been done very much, that kind of drew me towards it. I feel like it's always better to be like it's a good place to be if you're like a niche, if you're like only one of two people doing it in a space. But I think VR is still such an open medium with so much possible. Like there's so many diamonds that haven't been discovered yet. I mean, like I think it pays to go out there and try to push new territory.
Yeah. I think the biggest contributing factor for me in creating an RTS was just purely that it's a passion project. It's the first game that I developed in VR, and it started with me and my best friend discussing the landscape and then just wanting to make a game that we didn't see existing yet. And, we enjoyed VR immensely. We loved all the games, and as a technology and a medium, fascinated by it. And then I knew it was something that I wanted to push myself to develop in and learn in. And then when it came to, well, like, what would you create? When I looked at the space, especially at the time 4 or 5 years ago, there really wasn't any strategy games out there. There really weren't. And so that's when we said, okay, well, if it doesn't exist, let's make it. Easier said than done.
Oh, yeah.
but that was the initial fire starter.
Yeah, and one thing I do have to mention that I kind of have appreciated about like Star Blazer is that it's not quite the typical space RTS of you've just got ships shooting at each other. You've got actual like ship breakers and whatnot, and so there is like even a melee element to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so like that's been a nice little different dynamic. And then kind of with Eternal Starlight, I've loved how it things don't work in a straight line in your game. You can reposition and stuff can be like literally looping up and down like a roller coaster if you want it to. And so it's been really cool to see these new adaptations for RTS games that you guys have brought into VR. And as an RTS junkie, I'm nerding out over it. So so I guess there's hundreds of games available in VR these days. And I tell you how many there are in Steam, but I can't weed out all the porn, and I just don't want to dig through it. Unfortunately, there's just so much. But there's only like 17 listed as RTS games total between all platforms, and both of yours are on there. Why do you think that is? Like why do you think your games are being successful? Like Eternal Starlight especially has had just a huge amount of positive reviews on the Quest store. Why do you think more people aren't picking up on this?
Yeah, I mean, like, I feel like strategy is still like a niche genre, even not in VR. And I think the players they attract. Um, but I mean, I think that said, like, it really just takes good games to like draw people, and I think genre doesn't really matter as long as the game is like polished enough and the gameplay is good enough. I mean, I feel like there's so many other things that would be cool, like for VR RTS, like different settings, like fantasy or like realistic, real world stuff. There's definitely a potential for more, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think when we look at the strategy genre, one of the biggest things that hurts it is one of the best things about VR. And I say one of the best things about VR is the influx of people from outside the gaming community. If you really look at like the VR communities, you see a lot of people, you see artists, creators, tech enthusiasts that are not traditionally gamers. And in general, that's a great thing. I love the colorful space that's created with all this new diversity of thought. But in terms of trying to make and publish a strategy game, it definitely hurts you because your hardcore gamers are going to be the majority of your customers when it comes to like the real-time strategy games, unless you can get people in by making it very accessible and easy to play, which leads to the second problem is I think making an RTS in VR is extremely difficult. Compared to like a flat genre, which has weeded out a lot of the obstacles. There's still a lot of undiscovered difficulties in creating an RTS in VR. I mean, it's been 4 years and we're working on a big patch for Starblazer now because we still don't feel like we have the mechanics where we want them. And not like Space Slurpees. I know we've nailed that mechanic, but strategy has still just been a learning process.
Definitely. And like you guys have both said, traditional RTS, there's hundreds of different moving pieces, especially when you start working in unit abilities and everything else. And so with VR still kind of being in not quite infancy anymore, but toddler stage, I guess. I think you're right that the technicalities of trying to incorporate everything in, it's not to the point where you can perfect it yet, which is sad, because I want more.
We'll get there.
I'm hoping so. So okay, so here's something that I'm sure the two of you are eager to discuss. In your opinion, what are the biggest benefits that VR has to offer the RTS niche?
Yeah, I think. I think like the most unique thing about VR is that sense of scale that you get and depth. I think one of the coolest things in Eternal Starlight is like being able to like scale up and down the world and like zoom in and zoom out. Um, I think there's a lot of appeal in being like a godlike character, looking down on your little units and like telling them what to do. And it's just really cool to like zoom in and like see a fight like close up, and be able to choose how you want to look at things. Still to this day, it's like so hard to take screenshots of VR games. Like,
Oh,
I'll be looking at something, I'll be like, damn, this looks super cool with this like ship in the front and like all the stuff going on in the back. And then like you take a screenshot and it's just so flat and uninteresting. And it's like so hard to convey, how
Yeah.
it feels in VR. But that's something you don't get from 2D games. So I mean, I feel like that's the big win of VR is just that being able to do stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely for me it's the dimensionality of VR and going back to like the original Kickstarter of the idea was when we told ourselves, "Hey, we want to make a game that you couldn't play in 2D." And specifically we were talking about like the 3D controls and movement where it just wouldn't make sense to try to do with a mouse and keyboard, but you can do it very intuitively using your hands by pointing and clicking in a three-dimensional space.
yeah.
And I think that's the unique opportunity is, I mean, a lot of our fans are fans of Ender's Game, which is personally a favorite book and movie of mine too. And if you're familiar with it, there's that whole part where he's like, up is down. I mean, up is forward, and just thinking about your space differently in 3 dimensions. But like, you can't get that with the 2D game. You still know you're looking at like a flat surface, and even if you increase some height, at its core, it's still XY or
Yeah.
XZ, I guess.
So I have a confession to make here, and you're probably going to be profoundly disappointed in me when I say this, but I've never actually read or seen Ender's Game. And
That's okay.
it
You
is
still got the reference.
well, yeah, because my wife, it's one of her favorites, and so like she's constantly quoting it. Like,
That's all right. I read the book, but I never saw the movie. I did watch. I watched like a million clips from it to try to pull all the cool
Yeah.
stuff out, though.
one of these days, she's like, one of these days I'm going to sit you down and we're actually going to watch it so that you can actually see it. And although now that I'm thinking about it, we just got an Audible subscription, so I might just listen to it just
There
to
you go.
just to see satisfy her. Right on. Well, and so you bring up something interesting, Alexander, in that you were mentioning being able to work in a 3D space. What happened with my headphones here? I apologize. All of a sudden, I'm hearing myself out of my speakers. Okay, so can you guys still hear me? I apologize for this.
Yep.
Okay, I have no idea what happened there, but so anyway, you bring up something interesting in that working in a three-dimensional space, you haven't really seen that before, and it's something that was more intuitive to VR. Homeworld did that back in the early 2000s, but that was really the only game I can think of that's done that. Do you have any ideas to why that kind of idea was just sort of abandoned?
Yeah, I mean, Homeworld, like it was very hard for them to do a 3D game in 2D. I mean, I think they went through a lot of iterations to kind of get those mechanics down, and it's still like kind of difficult because I mean, like, the way perspective is, like, it can be hard to tell if something's like in front of you but up here or like further away down here. So I mean, it's still like kind of a sloppy compromise. And it's so much easier to do that kind of stuff in VR. Like, I didn't have nearly the amount of work to accomplish that they had to go through. I mean, that said, there's still like a bunch of other challenges that you have in VR that you don't have on a 2D screen, like, managing where people are looking, their attention and all that stuff. Like that stuff ends up being more challenging in VR.
Yeah, and I think it's like you said, it's definitely difficult to design, but I think it's equally difficult for you design it in a way for users to be able to comprehend and play it. Like a good example I'd give you is everybody's probably familiar with the game Connect 4, and it's like a flat surface, and then you're connecting 4 dots in a row by sliding things in. Unknown to a lot of people, there's actually a three-dimensional Connect 4, which is basically like a three-dimensional tic-tac-toe. I think there's kind of a version of it in Star Trek that I saw. And it's like you have to connect 4, but it can happen in any of the 3 dimensions, whether it's on one of the flat surfaces or it's going across the middle. And this is just a guess. My guess is probably not a lot of people have played it because it hurts the brain to think about. So then if you're designing a 3-dimensional RTS game, you have to think about, like, how is the user going to be able to think about this in a way that doesn't stress them out?
Yeah, I mean, the human brain is definitely hardwired for kind of a 2D map. So I think a lot of strategy games, even a lot of 3D games, will end up like effectively being a 2D game because that's how we think about things. Like, that's how we like map and like plan routes and things like that.
Right on. Well, I figured out what was going on. Apparently, my phone had turned on to Twitch, and that's why I'm just like, where is this coming from? So, okay, my apologies on that. Right on. Well, and so, all challenges aside, though, you guys still went ahead and worked with something in an XYZ axis, and so it's really admirable that you guys took that into the VR space. And so, like honestly, there are 3 VR games that I put on like my top 5 that are RTS. One of which is Star Blazer, one of which is Eternal Starlight. The third one, I don't want to mention it because unfortunately he wasn't able to be here, and I don't want to pitch someone else, but it's another RTS, which again works in that XYZ axis and is just absolutely amazing. And they're all space based, and so freaking love it.
Thanks.
So moving on a little bit here, how important do you guys think a campaign is to a VR RTS? Should it be more multiplayer based, or should a campaign be a relevant thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the stats, like, multiplayer's big and growing, but I mean, there's still quite a lot of people who like just want to play games single player. Um, I would say it's probably like 30%, don't, play multiplayer exclusively, 30% like play single player exclusively, something like that. So, I mean, I think it's still important to have that campaign and support it. Like when I first started developing Eternal Starlight, like, 5 years ago, like I would say multiplayer wasn't super important just because like so many games tried to do it and then ended up like not having enough players to support it and it was just dead. But I'd say nowadays, like it's becoming a lot more important to do multiplayer. So I think probably the best bet is like if you can do both, great. That's probably your best bet. I mean, it does get a lot harder to balance things, though. I will say that.
Yeah, I would say I would look at the question from outside of the VR space because I mean the biggest problem with multiplayer in VR is just the number of users that can join. But if you put that aside and you project to the future, kind of using 2D games as a model, I mean, I'm personally passionate about the multiplayer games, and I got into creating the RTS with the idea of esports in mind. And if you look at something like StarCraft, absolutely there are single player experiences and people value those. But for me personally, the hype is around the esports and the tournaments and the competitions, and so that's really what we want to lean into. But at the same time, when you go multiplayer first, trust me, you get a lot of feedback. What's the story? What am I supposed to do here? It's kind of, I think Dave's right. You almost have to do both. It's like I remember that discussion even on Call of Duty. Like, at what point did they just make it multiplayer? But no, there are people that play the campaign and only play the campaign, so you're kind of stuck offering both.
Well, and I think one big prime example of what happens when you don't include a campaign was the first Star Wars Battlefront that was put out by DICE, back in 2015. No campaign, very limited single player stuff, and it was kind of universally panned. I mean, it was visually spectacular, but
Yeah.
overall, people are just like there needs to be more. So I agree with you that I do think there needs to be a campaign. It is that balancing act, like you said. So I do actually. A friend of mine texted me because he didn't want to put this in chat. I guess. I don't know why. But he had a question that I want to pitch to you. It's not entirely RTS based, but you guys are both very well known, or you're knowledgeable about the niche. That's what I'm going for. And he's asking, do you ever see mainstream companies like Nintendo developing their games to fit the VR setting, or would they develop their own VR console? And so what are your opinions on that?
I think Nintendo would definitely do their own, but I mean, they've said a bunch of times that they're not super interested in doing VR, but I think that could change eventually. We'll see. Yeah, I mean, I think Nintendo always designs things like with the hardware in mind. I don't really see them doing anything on another platform, let's say.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's pretty rare. Yeah, in general, they keep their licensing for their games and all their content close to the hardware that they put it on, which is a good strategy. I mean, they have a very strong, solid brand. I think there's only like a few examples if I think about like maybe on mobile phones where they extended their licensing, of course, like Pokemon Go and, and things like that. That's a great example that worked out, but I agree. I think part of their key strategy in maintaining the authenticity of their brand would be to keep it on their hardware too.
Makes sense. And you don't really see a whole ton of crossover of like IPs that are on, like Nintendo, well, or any sort of system really to VR these days. I mean, you've got Green Hell coming up. You've got Resident Evil 4. I think Little Cities. There's very, very few games that are 2D that I can immediately think of that have made the jump to VR. Okay, I will preface that by saying obviously we have Skyrim and we have Fallout, but Skyrim I don't really count because it's on everything short of a microwave oven these days. Um, and
Yeah.
and neither one was designed with VR in mind. Which kind of actually takes me into something else I wanted to ask because we've only seen, kind of shifting gears in that direction. We've only seen two AAA studios try and venture into VR so far. You've got, Respawn with Medal of Honor, and then you had EA, which, made the VR version of Squadrons. Medal of Honor, to say it had a rocky rollout initially would be kind of an understatement. I mean, they fixed a lot, to be fair to them. They've done a lot to patch it, but that was not a good rollout. And then Squadrons, again, visually stunning, but the multiplayer scene completely dried up. Are these kind of examples that are making AAA studios kind of be like, okay, we need to kind of back off. It's not ready for us yet. Just dissuading them from getting in.
I think it's a simple math problem, in my opinion, just terms of number of users. I mean, if you look at, there was that statistic that Oculus was touting for a while around, our developers on the Oculus Store, this many studios have made $1 million on the Oculus Store. All right, so if they're touting that as an example of success, if that's the metric, that's $1 million. Sounds like a lot of money to an indie dev. Great, I'm throwing a house party after I make $1 million, right? But for a AAA studio, all you did was pay 10 developers for a year. There's not a lot of motivation, and they can't even afford to do that. And that's why they have to push out to the flat consoles until they get more users to make up for the substantial costs of making a AAA title. Somewhat bloated costs, but I won't take too many digs at the AAA studios.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think until the number of users gets high enough that they can make enough money to justify the development costs, they're not going to do it. I also, agree with what you said about a lot of, the flops haven't helped. I think studios have gotten burned. I mean, a lot of that I think is just lack of experience with doing VR stuff and learning that you can't just take a regular game and do it in VR. It has to be designed for VR from the beginning. And I think I actually thought Resident Evil 4 was kind of a turning point though, because that apparently sold really well.
Oh, yeah.
It was a port of an old game, so probably didn't take the budget that a brand new game would take. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's more older games that get ported to VR like that.
Yeah, and I'm inclined to agree with you. I mean, granted, I'm assuming you guys have played Resident Evil 4.
I haven't played it. I bought it, but I
Sorry.
still haven't played it.
Oh, well, I mean, even just on flat screen.
Oh, no.
Really?
I've played Resident Evil genre before, lightly,
Okay.
but I get scared too easily. That's a different topic.
Well, believe me, I'm right there with you because I was playing the Resident Evil 8 or Biohazard, whichever one you want to prefer to it, and the PSVR, and holy crap! I mean, it was mind-blowingly terrifying. The Mama Baker fight where she's just got bugs pouring out of her stomach. I was like, this is too much, and yet I can't get out of the car. And then my wife, of course, decided to come up and scare me at that point because that's what you do in a loving relationship. But no, I think you're right, Dave. That I think probably the right way forward is we're going to start seeing more of those older titles imported in because Resident Evil 4 for me holds a lot of nostalgic value. I mean, it was I loved that game on the Wii because that's when I first started playing it.
They have a guaranteed audience then because there's I mean that's the whole thing with AAA games is they want guaranteed hits, and if they have an established IP, then that's money in the bank for them.
So do you think we'd see something like maybe not Command and Conquer because EA just has gutted that franchise, but do you think we'd see maybe Homeworld, for example, come to VR? If we're talking about because they did do a Homeworld remastered 5-6 years ago.
They did a mobile game too. Yeah, I mean I could see them trying it on another platform. I don't know.
Yeah, because
it's possible.
Because I'm trying to think of just the RTS titles that could work as a port to VR, and that's the only one that's really immediately coming to mind. Although I might be a little biased because the space RTS is really what I'm more used to.
I was thinking. I was thinking about your questions actually, and one of the games I thought of was Dawn of War. Actually, might be good because I mean they've done there's been Warhammer games in VR already, so maybe they would be willing to have that license be used there.
That's true. Yeah, Carbon Studio's done a lot. Well, Carbon and I'm blanking on the other studio off the top of my head. The one that's doing Pixel something. I know who they are. I'm just blanking on it. But yeah, no, they've done a lot with Warhammer. And like my brother-in-law is a huge Warhammer nerd, and he's always bugging me like, "Oh, you need to get Battle Sister. You need to get Battle Sister." I'm like, I don't have space on my Quest to do that. because they're just so big. But I mean, you're right. Like with the licensing and the IP and whatnot, I think those are perfect. I hadn't even thought about that one. The Dawn of War series, the Warhammer franchise. I think that would be a perfect one to bring in. So sorry, I'm just kind of scrolling through my questions here. We actually kind of hit on.
I
all
think
of them.
I think one of the studios that I don't expect to see a VR title from would be Blizzard, and I think with StarCraft it's not going to come. When I saw the acquisition from Microsoft, while I think it's bad for the industry as a whole to have this conglomerate of studios, because I think just big corporation slows everything down. And so if you're a gamer, sorry, that means you're probably going to get your titles slower and slower, my opinion. But as an indie dev, that could be a good thing, good opportunity. And specifically when it comes to StarCraft, that told me there's probably not going to be a StarCraft VR game for a really long time, just because Microsoft, while they did mixed reality for their PCs, there's been no interest in an XR strategy when it comes to the Xbox. And so their focus has to be on their hardware, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think that means StarCraft VR. So don't worry, Dave. We're safe for a few years.
Woohoo!
Well, and believe me, I get where you're coming from about big conglomerate corporations slowing things down and whatnot. In this particular case, I actually am kind of happy Microsoft took over Blizzard.
Oh, they needed a culture change. That's a totally different topic.
Yes. Yeah, and
absolutely, that's a good.
Yeah, I mean, Bobby Kotick needed to go.
Yep.
Just terrible CEO for what he's allowed to have happen. And like I mentioned earlier, we can debate the WoW expansions, but a lot of people have been less than thrilled with them. And I think they've been slowly gutting Blizzard for a good while at this point, ever since Activision took over it. And so I'm actually kind of happy to see Microsoft take it back, especially with the president of Microsoft Gaming, about his comments about how it used to be like the Pixar of the gaming industry. Now he wants to get back to that. And so I'm crossing fingers, holding out hope. But by and large, I agree with what you're saying about just clogging things up, taking too long. Well, and it that kind of does make me sad that you don't think that we're going to see any AAA kind of strategy game titles come to VR anytime soon. I mean, in your perfect world, which one would you most want to see, though? Just out of curiosity.
Well, I was sad that they never made a Warcraft 4. I mean, I know we just talked about this company, but Warcraft 4 in VR would be pretty awesome, I think.
Oh, you're singing my song right now. Oh, I would. Oh, I would be so happy with the Warcraft 4.
Yeah, I'm a huge Star Wars fan, so I think Empire at War would definitely be an interesting title to see played out in VR.
Well,
But
and that's one that I think would combine like the best of both worlds, because you've got your space conflict where you can do everything in the 3D element and whatnot, and then you've also got your ground conflict where you can have that kind of like God's eye view and command everything there.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so much love for all the characters, and
Mhm.
the music in Star Wars just so good. I mean,
But the only problem is that you have to deal with Darth Mickey and friends, and that's the EA's holding on to that IP very, very tightly.
True.
So, well, right on. Well, is there anything else you guys kind of want to add in here? I know we kind of blitzed through a lot of these questions between me asking them or them just kind of naturally getting covered. So,
I mean, for me, not really much else here. Just check out Eternal Starlight. Got a big update we're working on, hopefully in the next month or two. Should add like a lot of new content and new campaign and stuff. So check it out.
Awesome. Nice. Yeah, for us, if anybody's headed out to GDC, Tobii, they're the eye tracking company that's going to be on like PSVR 2 and a lot of the other headsets. They're actually showing off a demo of Star Blazer because we built an eye tracking. It's part of a big patch we're doing called Star Blazer Factions, which, like I said, we're always iterating on controls. So Star Blazer is going to be even easier to play. And we're splitting up the fleets into 3 separate factions, very similar to StarCraft. So there's now other races to play as, and pretty excited about that patch. So keep an eye on that one and check out the demo if you're going to GDC.
okay, so I'm going to put the brakes on wrapping this up here because I actually did mean to ask you about that, and I'm glad that you mentioned it. So, like, I'm very curious because eye tracking is becoming one of those new things that we're seeing in VR become more and more prevalent. How difficult was that to implement?
I think eye tracking makes a lot of sense in VR, and it's an interesting technology because if you were to look at my LinkedIn, you see I spent like 7 years at HP in the PC industry, and so we've always looked at eye tracking in like a flat space. Um, but then the first time I saw it in VR, it actually makes sense because you're trying to do things intuitively, and your hands can get you part of the way because at least you're pointing and clicking. But I tell you what, your eyes are entirely way more tuned and accurate than your hands will ever be. And so, what we're using it for in Star Blazer is one for information at gaze is something that Toby does with a lot of their software partners where if you look at something, gives additional information like statistics, so you know which ships are which and how to battle them. But we actually use it proactively as well. And so it assists in the selection of buttons and even more importantly during battles of ships. And so if you're looking at a particular ship, and rather there's several of them, we tune the algorithm so that you get more accurate selection of that ship. Just to help you out in battle, a little faster pacing, and it's fun. I was very excited about it.
Yeah,
Pretty cool.
yeah, like eye tracking is one of those things that I've been really excited to see become more widely implemented because I remember I watched a video of Ubisoft doing this with Assassin's Creed Rogue of all games back like in 2015.
Yeah,
And so but it was all webcam based, like it wasn't VR, obviously. And then that was like the last I'd heard of it up until like the last, 4 or 5 months when suddenly it starts emerging onto the scene. And I'm just like, why have I not gotten any updates until now? Why is it all of a sudden now usable?
yeah. No, I mean, hats off to everybody that implemented in the 2D space. I'm not going to knock that. I'm just saying in VR, it's
No,
great.
it makes total sense.
It's so intuitive and it's such an enhancer. I personally think we'd see more games pick it up once they understand like how it best helps their game.
So, kind of in a similar vein to that, like voice commands could be, the game that wasn't able to be here today, they've implemented that, and that's been one of my favorite features of that game is that you're able to command your ship so easily. But they're like one of the only games that I've seen make it so seamless. Is that something that you think is going to become more widespread? Is that something that you think is going to become more adopted overall over time?
Yeah, it's something I was thinking of adding also. I think Oculus now has it like available at a platform level, so I think a lot more people will start to do it. On the PC, it was a little more difficult because I think you needed to like pay for a service or something like that. But yeah, I think it could be super helpful, especially for strategy games.
Oh gosh, yeah.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, no, I think it's extremely useful to do. It's a challenge for us from a development perspective just because we localize in 9 languages, and actually our biggest market at Starcade Arcade is actually Asia. It's not the West.
That's true. You guys recently got on Pico, didn't you?
That's
I
correct.
remember you
Yeah.
mentioning that to us.
Pico
So.
and Nolo VR.
Oh, really?
And
How's
Mhm.
Pico doing?
Pico's good. We enjoy work with them. They're a great partner.
Sweet, awesome.
Yeah, right on. Well, I'm really excited to see that become a bit more widespread. And I really am excited to see RTS become a bit more prevalent in the VR world. Over time, I think it's just something that hopefully we will see more of. But for now, you guys have put together great games, and I'm just incredibly grateful that we've had the opportunity to, enjoy them and play them and whatnot, and just bring them to more people. But again, guys, thank you so much for being here. We're gonna wrap up a little bit early because I'm out of questions and it's Friday, and I'm sure you guys want to get to to your various day stuff for the weekend. So, but yeah, Dave with Eternal Starlight, Alexander with Starblazer. Check them out on Quest and on Steam. They're available on both. And yeah, check us out on Start Engine for the Virtual Athletics League with our crowdfunding. I cannot talk for today. Our equity crowdfunding campaign, startengine.com/Val. That's startengine.com/VAL. Until next time, thank you all for tuning in, and we will catch you in the next games. See you then.